Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. My name is Melissa Hayden, and I'm a biologist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service in Rhode Island, which is part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I am going to talk tonight about some of our programs and our wildlife and forestry practices. And then my colleague Liz Camps is going to talk about our agronomic practices that we offer through NRCS. Right, let's see if I can. There we go. All right, so just a brief list of topics here. I'll give a very brief introduction to NRCS, talk about programs, and then spend most of my time talking about the common wildlife and forestry practices that we implement in Rhode Island. So who is the Natural Resources Conservation Service? We used to be known when we first formed as the Soil Conservation Service, which was created in 1935 as a result of the Dust Bowl. And we changed our name to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or we're often referred to as NRCS, in 1994 as a result of the fact that we were focused on many resources in addition to soils. So we're the lead federal agency within USDA that helps landowners voluntarily conserve resources on their properties. So some of our main goals are productive soil, healthy plants, and clean water. We also consider other factors in our planning, such as energy conservation. We look at aquatic habitat, air quality, invasive plants, and livestock health. So there are a wide range of things that we can take into consideration in our planning. So again, we provide technical assistance to help landowners develop and implement conservation plans. And so these plans will look at what are the resource concerns on a property, what are the goals of the landowner, and then the plan will recommend practices to address those resource concerns. And we can also provide financial assistance to protect and restore natural resources. And all of our programs are voluntary and non-regulatory. So here's a list of some of our main financial assistance programs that we offer in Rhode Island. We have the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP for short. This is our main program for farmers and forest landowners to address resource concerns, and it's our most well-funded program for this purpose in Rhode Island. We also have something called the Conservation Stewardship Program, which provides folks who are doing a good job of environmental stewardship with an incentive to continue to maintain that base level of conservation while choosing at least one additional activity to adopt over the 5-year contract. And then we have a Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which is a program where we work with partners to address resource issues. And Forest Health Works is an easement program under RCPP, which is designed to protect forest land in Rhode Island to combat fragmentation and improve wildlife habitat. And this is done through placement of easements on private forest lands in the state. And this is just something we started doing a couple years ago. And then we have an agricultural conservation easement program, or ASAP, which is, it includes the agricultural land easements, which provide easements on land that's currently in agricultural production with the intention that it will remain that way. And then we also have a wetland reserve easement program under this broader program that provides easements on wetland areas to enhance wildlife habitat. And there's funding for a restoration component in that program as well. So just a little bit more information about EQIP. So I mentioned it provides financial and technical assistance to agricultural producers and forest landowners. These are multi-year contracts. A producer will decide what practices they want to implement in a contract. They're usually about 2 or 3 years long. And some of the benefits that producers can get through these contracts are improved soil and water quality, water conservation, addressing soil erosion, enhancing wildlife habitat, improvements to grazing operations, increased resilience to extreme weather events, and then improving forest health. And CSP is a little bit different, although there are some similarities to EQIP, but it helps agricultural producers maintain and improve their existing conservation systems while also deciding on at least one additional activity to adopt. So participants will earn payments through CSP for conservation performance. The higher the performance, the higher the payment. And this is really for folks who are passionate about conservation and environmental stewardship. And then the minimum annual payment for CSP is $4,000. So really what I wanted to get into tonight mostly is What are our wildlife and forestry practices that we most commonly use in Rhode Island? And so these are things you can work with NRCS to do on your properties. And so here's a list of our most commonly used wildlife practices. And I have a slide for each one of these. So I'll go into some more detail. Wildlife habitat planting is used to seed habitat to provide nectar and pollen for pollinator species. And typically we would develop a mix of at least 9 different species of native forbs in addition to native warm season grasses. And we want to include species that flower in each of the 3 bloom periods, so spring, summer, and fall, so that resources are available throughout the growing season. In order for this practice to be successful, site preparation prior to seeding is really important. You need to have a good, clean seed bed in order to achieve good seed to soil contact so that those seeds will germinate. It's important for landowners to know that these plantings are pretty slow to establish. So we say in the first year it sleeps, in the second year it creeps, and in the third year it leaps. So by the third year, you're seeing some really good benefits, but they are slow to establish. And then, as we all know, many of our pollinator populations are in decline. So whatever we can do to provide resources for these species will be beneficial. And in addition, we want to encourage keeping or creating exposed soil and woody debris on site, which provides space for nesting for these different species. And then with regard to maintenance of these plantings, it really consists of mowing outside of the growing season approximately every 3 years just to keep colonization of those woody species to a minimum. We also have a practice called tree and shrub establishment. So it's used to plant native trees or shrubs for wildlife habitat. And it can include some site preparation or mulching of plants to reduce weed pressure and help retain soil moisture. The species that are chosen will depend upon the targeted wildlife species. So some species we might plant for pollinators would include serviceberry, spicebush, black cherry. Some species that we might plant for migratory songbirds might be arrowwood viburnum, elderberry, or gray dogwood. And then other species that we might want to target for New England cottontail would include blackberry, highbush blueberry, or bayberry. There's definitely overlap with regard to what native plants benefit these different species, but we do try to target the plantings for the wildlife that we're trying to address. And it's important to consider tree protection so that the new plantings have some protection against deer browse, given the large deer population that we have in Rhode Island. And the cost of the tree protection is included in some of our payment scenarios. So you're getting a payment from NRCS to include that tree protection and make sure those plantings are successful. We have brush management and herbaceous weed treatment. So these are used to treat or remove invasive plant species, which could be either woody or herbaceous. And treatment methods may include mechanical and or chemical methods. So here's 3 of the worst offenders in Rhode Island. And then we also see a lot of like multiflora rose, Japanese barberry, Phragmites is a big one, autumn olive. So these practices are being used to try to manage these invasive species in order to improve habitat or improve forage quality in a pasture or improve forest health or just simply to reduce the population or spread of the invasive species. Typically for these species, one treatment really is not enough. So we have practices that can be used multiple times per year or over the course of several consecutive years to try to get a handle on these populations. We have a practice called hedgerow planting. So this is used to install dense linear plantings of mostly woody plants for habitat or to reduce drift of particulates or pesticides. And typically we would apply this practice on cropland or pasture. These are usually woody species, but can include perennial bunch grasses that are at least 3 feet in height. And the primary purpose for this practice in Rhode Island is wildlife habitat, including food, cover, or wildlife corridors. And so in this case, when we're planning for wildlife, we would want a minimum width of 15 feet and at least 2 species. But if we can get more species in there, that's even better. Some other objectives could include a reduction in wind and soil erosion, protection of water quality, and also to attract beneficial insects that can help combat crop pests. Site preparation here is important to reduce competition from invasives or other plants such as perennial weeds that may outcompete the hedgerow species. Wildflowers can be seeded alongside hedgerows to provide pollen and nectar sources while slower growing shrubs are becoming established. And irrigation may be needed during establishment depending on the conditions, and you may need to do some weeding as well during establishment in the short term. Structures for wildlife is a practice that we use to install structures such as brush piles, bat boxes, bird boxes, and nesting platforms. So we would choose a location for the structure that meets the needs of the targeted species and select materials that are safe for wildlife and that are durable. We would also usually include a predator guard on most nest boxes. And we provide specifications to the landowner for building nest boxes for bats or bird species, as each of these species is going to require, has different needs and requires different box dimensions to support successful use of the box. We also provide specifications for building brush piles. Brush piles can provide nesting habitat. They can provide resting areas or concealment and protection from predators. They could be used by birds, by rabbits, other small mammals, as well as reptiles and amphibians. So these piles can serve a use for a variety of different species. And when you're building a brush pile, you start with the largest material on the bottom, creating space for animals to sort of enter on the bottom, and then you pile the smaller material on top, as you can see in the pictures here. We can also assist with platforms for osprey or eagle nesting, which should be placed near a good quality water source, and other birds such as hawks, owls, and herons may also end up utilizing these platforms as well. Beetle banks are a pretty cool practice. We use this to install a mounded berm that's densely planted to native bunch grasses adjacent to a crop field, and it provides habitat for predatory beetles, spiders, or other insects that attack crop pests. So these sites provide permanent vegetation that will give shelter or overwintering and egg-laying sites that these beneficial insects need as part of their life cycle. It also provides a refuge and escape from tillage and other field operations, and this practice provides for biological control of insect pests and can reduce reliance on pesticide applications as well. The beetle banks can be established with plugs or with seeds, and supplemental irrigation may be needed during establishment, especially when you use plugs. Maintenance would be some high mowing or weeding during the first year, and ongoing management in future years may require monitoring and management of woody species that may try to colonize. Some of the species that we would recommend in Rhode Island for these beetle banks would be little bluestem, purple top, Indian grass, switchgrass, or big bluestem. And we can also include some cool season species such as Canada wild rye or Virginia wild rye. Windbreak establishment is used for establishing typically multiple, but sometimes single rows of trees and or shrubs, but usually trees, in a linear design for wind protection. They can also offer management of snow and wildlife habitat, and typically we would install these on cropland or pasture. We have multiple scenarios under this practice depending on the number of rows of trees that are needed, and we will go ahead and develop a practice design that evaluates the height and density of plantings to meet the intended purpose. And the practice can be used to either establish a brand new windbreak in a field or for renovation of an existing windbreak that's no longer really functioning the way that you would want it to. We also have a practice called upland wildlife habitat management, which is used for two purposes. It's used to create snags, which are standing dead trees that can be utilized by wildlife. And it's also used to provide an incentive payment for delayed mowing on existing grasslands to provide habitat for grassland nesting birds. So snags are created by girdling live trees, which will then kill the tree but leave it standing. And this provides really good habitat for wildlife. Snags often will develop cavities, which either can occur naturally or excavated by birds and mammals. Some of the cavity nesters that would use snags include things like woodpeckers and owls, and squirrels and raccoons will also use snags for shelter. And bats will utilize the peeling bark that you often see on a snag for roosting. And in addition, they're host to a variety of insects, which serve as a food source for many of these species. With regard to the delayed mowing practice for grassland birds, a field as small as 5 or 10 acres could be utilized by bobolinks. We recommend no mowing between May 15th and August 5th to allow grassland nesting birds time to nest. And some of our grassland nesting species that we have in Rhode Island include the eastern meadowlark, the grasshopper sparrow, the bobolink, and the northern bobwhite. And all of these have experienced persistent widespread declines and due in part to loss of habitat. So now I'm just going to go through the forestry practices that are most commonly used in Rhode Island. So we first have a forest management plan. So this is a practice that we use where we can provide financial assistance to a landowner to create a written forest management plan for a property that incorporates the landowner goals, the forest inventory, and then management recommendations. And these plans are written by a certified forester. You would work with a forester to talk about what your goals are and objectives for the property. The forester will walk the site and identify unique stands and any resource issues. And the plan will include an in-depth inventory of what's on the property, such as stocking level. It'll look at species composition, basal area, any existing cultural resources, water resources, looks at a whole host of different things. And the written plan that you get will include maps of the property with the different forest stands delineated. The forester will then make recommendations for improving forest health and habitat and develop a timeline working with you for implementing those recommendations. These plans are active for a period of 10 years. And if you decide that you want to apply to NRCS for funding to do any forest management practices, you first need to have a forest management plan developed to outline what are those recommended practices for your property. And so one of those practices might be forest stand improvement. This is used to cut selected trees to achieve a desired forest condition. So the result is a desired composition and structure of the forest stand, which can improve forest health and wildlife habitat. The plan will identify the existing conditions and then what is the desired future condition based on the goals of the landowner and what's best for the health of the forest. A target stocking level will be identified and the forester will mark the trees that need to be cut. This practice improves the growth of the remaining stock, and then the harvested trees can be sold or used for firewood. There are different types of forest stand improvement that can be applied depending on the goals. So some might be thinning for wildlife and forest health. That's a really common one that we use in Rhode Island. Another type of forest stand improvement is a patch cut, which is a small clearing that's created to mimic natural disturbance and provide light for some shade intolerant species to grow. And then we also have a practice called daylighting, which is thinning and managing the understory along roads to reduce forest density and limit wildfire risk. So we're seeing more and more interest in that recently also. Early successional habitat development is used to remove trees in order to create a young forest habitat for wildlife. So there have been declines in wildlife populations in the Northeast that rely on this habitat type. For this practice, you would harvest all trees greater than 3 inches DBH, with the exception of maybe 12 to 15 trees per acre that remain as seed trees. When creating this habitat type, the slash and the brush piles that are left over should be left on the ground surface, which can provide additional cover. We have lost this habitat type as forests have gone through succession, and most forests in the Northeast are now mature forests. So through that process, we lost a lot of our early successional habitat. And this has impacted wildlife that utilize this habitat type, which includes migratory songbirds and other species like ruffed grouse or woodcock or our native turtles and New England cottontail. As far as the size of the early successional cut, we recommend about at least 10 acres for New England cottontail and at least 3 acres for migratory songbirds. And we always recommend cutting during the winter months to minimize the impacts to wildlife. And it's important just to remember that this is a transitional habitat, so it will revert back to mature forest at some point in the future if it's not maintained. We have a practice called woody residue treatment. This is used to treat the residual woody material on a site that could be due to a weather event or a pest event. And that material can be chipped on site or it can be hauled off site. This practice will reduce hazardous fuels on a site as well as the risk of insect and disease issues. The material may be on the ground or it could be standing dead material that needs to be cut. And we may see this situation develop as a result of events like a fire or a windstorm or an ice storm or a pest. So we've had excessive defoliation in recent years due to spongy moth outbreaks. So in some places, hardwood stands are completely dead as a result, and this practice could be used to remove this standing dead material. So forest trails and landings are used to create a trail that can be utilized by logging and forestry equipment to implement a forest management practice. So they're typically about 10 feet wide and may include measures to reduce soil erosion if there's any kind of slope on the trail. So for that, we would use a practice called water bars. So the idea really is just to provide access on a temporary basis for forest management activities. This practice may include things like a temporary wetland or a stream crossing in situations where you need to cross a stream or a wetland and you can't really avoid it, but you need to get to the other side to do some forest management practice. We would install a crossing to protect the wetland or the stream resource during those forest management activities, and then the crossings would be removed following implementation of the forest management activity. If slopes in an area are steep, we'd recommend water bars to slow the flow of water and prevent erosion. And this practice can also include construction of a landing if needed on a property for managing equipment for the forestry operation and different forest products as well. We've had a lot more interest in fuel breaks recently. So this is used to reduce vegetation, debris, and litter in order to diminish the spread of wildfire. So this includes removing ladder fuels and thinning the overstory. You would remove slash and then manage grasses and forbs in the understory. Ladder fuels can be live or dead vegetation and branches that can carry a fire that's burning in low-growing vegetation to taller vegetation. So the goal is to maintain adequate vertical separation between those surface fuels and the tree canopy. And then as part of this practice, we would also thin the overstory stand sufficiently to reduce the tree canopy and the potential of a crown fire. We would treat or remove the slash to minimize fuel loadings and reduce the risk of wildfire, and manage the height or density of grasses and forbs to minimize those fine fuels that can be in these areas. We often will plan this with the use of existing features like streams or roads or forest trails. These features that are occurring naturally on the landscape can increase the size of a fuel break. So the standard width to plan in Rhode Island is about 35 to 100 feet, and we often install them along existing forest trails or streams or roads. And then riparian forest buffers are used to plant native woody vegetation where you will want to establish a buffer adjacent to a surface water feature. So the goals could be to improve water quality and wildlife habitat, reduce erosion along a stream or water feature, and then restore plant communities. So we typically would plan this where the existing or the natural plant community has been disturbed or impacted by some activity. And planting can include direct seeding or potted plants or bare root or live stakes. And we usually plan a pretty high density of planting so that we make sure we get good coverage within these areas. The width and the planting specifications will depend upon the objectives for the site, but the minimum width is 35 feet. And this practice can improve stream health by shading the stream and lowering the water temperature. We also have a separate practice that can be used when seeding herbaceous plants in the riparian area called riparian herbaceous cover. And then the last one I want to mention is forest farming. So this is used to manage the overstory and plant trees and shrubs to increase plant diversity and improve habitat. It uses combinations of overstory and understory species based on compatibility with each other. So the practice is used to manage the overstory tree canopy consistent with the light requirements of understory crops. And it can also include planting of trees or shrubs. Trees that are going to be thinned must be marked by a certified forester. The goal is to open the existing canopy to improve the growth of desired woody or herbaceous crops, as well as native wildlife or pollinator plants. And just like with any of our other forestry practices, you'd be required to have a forest management plan developed in order to implement this particular practice. So here's just my email and some information for the office. And I am going to go ahead and stop sharing so that Liz can share her screen. Let's see. All right, Liz, are you good to go?
Uh, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Yeah.
I was challenging this one.
And I see your first slide there.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Hold on one second. I kind of move my view. Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm actually super thrilled to be here today and introduce myself. I'm gonna kind of give you a little bit of what I have done in my life, and introduce you to why I'm here on Rhode Island. So my name is Liz Camps. I'm the state agronomist. I'm here on Long Island. I'm actually housed in the same office as Melissa. We are in Warwick, in Quaker Lane. Um, and I'm officially stepping into this role in July 2024. So I've been here for about 7 months now. I have an educational background in environmental and plant science, which has shaped my career in conservation and agronomy. I hold a bachelor's degree in environmental science and a master's degree in plant health management. I have about 22 years of experience with USDA and a strong foundation in soil health, sustainable agriculture, and conservation planning. My journey started with the Forest Service. That was about in, I think it was 2003. And after a little while, I transitioned to NRCS, which I have worked in various locations, including California, Puerto Rico, Tennessee, U.S. Virgin Islands, Washington, D.C., New York, and now Rhode Island. So I have extensive experience in conservation planning, working with farms of all sizes. I go from, or I learn from small farms, family-owned specialty crop farms to larger scale livestock operations. A significant portion of my career, I spent it on Long Island, New York, which in many ways shares similarities with Rhode Island in terms of agriculture and land use. But however, I must say that Rhode Island is even prettier than Long Island. So I want to just talk about a little bit of the pictures that you see on the screen. So on the right side is after my picture. On the right side of the presentation, you will see the photos of three different farms on Long Island specifically that I work closely with. My work has involved a diverse range of conservation practices, including cover crops, high tunnels, rotational grazing, and irrigation systems. As I mentioned earlier, I have a strong background in working with small farms and specialty crops, which continues to be a huge part of my role today. So in all my presentations, I always like to talk about my farmers. And because I have more years in Long Island, I'm gonna just share some farmers that I work with on Long Island. So on the left side of the screen, you can see Chris. He's from Stillwater Farm. He manages a full-scale tree farm in the Hamptons in New York, where he has adopted cover cropping as part of his farm management strategy. Using cover crops in tree nurseries is actually not common. I'm not sure. I never heard, well, so far, I haven't heard that is used in Rhode Island. But Chris actually is the only one using it in Long Island. But he has found that planting cover crops after harvesting trees has significantly improved organic matter levels, ultimately enhancing soil health and tree quality. And Long Island and Rhode Island have very similar soils. Long Island is very sandy and poor in organic matter, about 5.2% 5.2 pH, and it's very similar to Rhode Island. So in the middle picture, you can see Will from St. Lee Farms. He's the largest organic farm on Long Island. He grows about, I think it's 300 acres of specialty crops, and these include Asian vegetables as well. Will has always been super proactive about soil health and regularly conducted soil testing to ensure his soils was in great shape. He was always very excited to show me his results and year after year to show me the improvement. So we always celebrated. He and I collaborated on several projects. He was one of my most active producers. And some of the projects we work on was diversifying his cover crops and crop rotation, as well as the effects on cover crops and nutrient applications. So we work a lot on that, and he saw a huge difference. And also he reduced a lot of fertilizer applications because of his cover crops. And in the last picture on the right, you have George Starkey from Starkey Farms, who operates over 400 acres of nursery stock. I designed his irrigation system, and this images actually captures the moment that the system was turned on. And I said to him, "Can I take a picture of you?" And he was absolutely. So that's why you see a huge smile on his face, because he was excited that the system worked. And I was more excited that actually designing something that worked. All right, so I'm going to step on what I do or what my role is as a state agronomist and why I was hired. So one of the most common questions I get is what exactly does an agronomist do? And I get this at work, and I get also out for work with my own family and friends. So I love to take a moment to explain my role and responsibilities as a state agronomist. And in this position, I'm responsible for developing state level policies, procedures, and technical instructions to guide conservation efforts. I also collaborate with other New England states to create unified practices guidance across the region, because we like to really stay similar as much as we can. I also provide technical assistance to state leadership and field teams to ensure effective implementation of conservation practices. I deliver training to all NRCS staff. I'm also available to help farmers to understand practices that they are not familiar with. I help the staff to navigate conservation planning and also to use agronomic practices the best they can. I also revise the Field Office Technical Guide. We call it the FOTG, and it's a critical resource that houses all NRCS practices, the standards, implementation requirements, and guidance for conservation practices. This website is available to everybody that wants to know about NRCS practices. So you just have to put in Google FOTG NRCS and it will come up. And I also work with research teams and extension programs to translate the latest agricultural research into practical, real-world solutions for our farmers. So as an agronomist, my ultimate goal is to support farmers in improving soil health, increasing productivity, and adopting sustainable farming practices that benefit both their operation and the environment. So one of the things that I think has the most value, or one of the services I provide that has the most value, is help farmers interpret their soil test report. So understanding soil health is key to making informed management decisions. So on the screen, you can see an example of a soil report. That this particular report is called CASH. It's the Comprehensive Assessment of Soil Health, and it's developed by Cornell University in New York. So this type of soil health assessment provides a comprehensive analysis of soil organic matter, structure, nutrient availability, and biological activity. The great news is that NRCS can cost share this soil health assessment, and also helps the good thing about this is it helps farmers to make data-driven decisions to improve the soil as a long term. And we also, I don't have a picture of that, but we also do have a practice called 217 soil health assessment too that covers for manure, composting, plant tissue, etc. It's like the things that we don't do under the regular soil health, we can do it on the other practices. So here's an example of the chart or the document that I create for someone that wants to look for a soil assessment overview. So I either create a chart or graph or a written report. So whichever the farmer feels that will help them the most, that's what I will create. I love talking to the farmers. Sometimes I get this from the field directly. But I do prefer to talk to the farmer directly so I can get an overview of what they are growing, what are the rotation, what they're expecting, and what are the goals. And in base of that, we can create a plan that will help them manage the farm or the soil better. So early in the presentation, Melissa discussed the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, which we call EQIP. Now, I want to highlight a specific funding pool that is designed for organic farmers, and I don't think we utilize as much in Rhode Island. Maybe because people are not aware of, but I just want to introduce it so we start making the program popular. So the Organic Transition Initiative provides financial support specifically for producers transitioning to organic farming. This initiative ensures that transitioning farms do not have to compete with conventional farms for funding. And this means that we have several funding pools in the state, and each one is for something specifically. It could be for different programs that we have, or under EQIP, we have several funding pools. So this one in particular is created just for organic transitioning, so we don't have to put you in the general pool and compete with 200, 300 farms, depending the amount of applications we get. So the qualify for this, farmers must be actively working towards organic certification and to ensure the land is in transition to organic production. So if you already have organic certification but want to transition additional land, you're still eligible for this program. So, however, participants will implement Conservation Practice Standard 823, which is the organic management standard, and we will help you in-house to do that. For the ones that are actually looking to transition to organic and get their plan done, we have what is called CAP 138, which is the conservation plan supporting organic transition, or the DIA 140. I'm not sure this one was still available, but it's the DIA 140 transition to organic design plan, which must be done by a technical service provider. And we have a list online of providers or TSPs that we call that can do this plan. They are not done in-house. It will have to be done by a specialist. And NRCS does have funding as well for this. Then we have, and don't get confused, the Organic Initiative, which is another funding pool separate from the Organic Transition Initiative, which is funny because both have kind of the same name. But this one in particular allows organic exempt and transitioning producers. Unlike the Organic Transition Initiative, this program allows organic producers to apply for multiple EQIP conservation practices, including cover cropping, crop rotation, mulching, fencing, water facilities. So what this program does is that it opens all the EQIP practices to the organic farmer. The other one that I mentioned has limited practices. That's one of the big differences. And this one will allow exempt organic producers to also apply, which the organic transitioning doesn't allow that. So the funding for this one in particular is capped at $140,000 under 2018 Farm Bill, which we are currently operating under until we get the new one approved, hopefully soon. The good news is that all conservation practices available through EQIP are also accessible through this initiative, which I mentioned that before, and you don't have to be organic. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what I you can if 140, let's say a project is that you're doing with us is more than $140,000, you can still apply for regular EQIP, which will allow you to have more funding instead of using the organic. We just wanted, or NRCS wanted to create these organic funding pools specifically to allow organic farmers to not compete with the rest of the fund pool. So here are the most common practices or conservation practices implemented on the organic system plan. And these ones include soil health improvement practices, habitat creation for pollinators and beneficial insects, nutrient and pest management strategies. We also like to enhance cropping rotations, nutrient pest management activities, and we can also insert high tunnels, and that's a huge, a very popular practice. These are also another set of practices. I believe Melissa mentioned some of them, but I wanted to show you some of the pictures. Again, high tunnels are super popular. We also have a bunch of soil health practices, irrigation systems. I used to design them. I love them. And I think if you like them, you should have them. They're very practical, specifically drip irrigation, pollinator habitats, and manure storage areas. So you're not piling your manure in areas that are too sensitive. And mulching, which is a huge one, specifically for sandy soils. And these are other practices that are available through most of our programs. And the ones in dark are the ones that we use the most. That doesn't mean that we can't plan the other ones. And a new one that I do want to mention is the Soil Carbon Amendment that was just released last year. So it's available for this funding pool. And what it does is allow us to pay for biochar and compost. So it's more for amendments. And other states use it, but for Rhode Island, it's the first time we are using it. And that's all I have. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me if you don't want to ask today.